All right, guys, welcome back. We are going to be going over Seneca's letter number 20, and it is on practicing what you preach. Should be a good one. He says here, if you are in good health and if you think yourself worthy of becoming at last your own master, I am glad, for the credit will be mine. If I can drag you from the floods in which you are being buffeted without hope of emerging. This, however, my dear Lucilius, I ask and beg of you on your part, that you let wisdom sink into your soul and test your progress not by mere speech or writings, but by stoutness of heart and decrease of desire. Prove your words by your deeds. Okay, so Seneca is always encouraging, but also he's a little bit harsh as well, because he's not going to BS, right? He says that if you think that you're ready to actually be able to trust yourself to become your own master, okay, then it's good, because I'm going to take credit for this, all right? Because if I can drag you from the floods, which you're being buffeted without hope of emerging, then that's pretty good, okay? However, though, here's what I'm going to tell you, all right? Make sure that you let the wisdom actually sink into your soul, and don't test your progress by what you can write, the letters you can write me, the things you're talking about, but it's actually your heart, your decrease of desire. Prove the words that you're saying by your deeds. Let me see that you're actually becoming stoic. Let me see that you're actually absorbing this wisdom, because you don't need as much. You're desiring less. All right? In verse 2, he says, far different is the purpose of those who are speech making and trying to win the approbation of a throng of hearers. Far different that of those who allure the ears of young men and idlers by many-sided or fluent argumentation. Philosophy teaches us to act, not to speak. It exacts out of every man that he should live according to his own standards, that his life should not be out of harmony with his words, and that further, his inner life should be of one hue and not out of harmony with all his activities. This, I say, is the highest duty and the highest proof of wisdom, that deed and word should be in accord, that a man should be equal to himself under all conditions and always the same. So he's saying here, look, here's the thing. Don't just go and talk, right? A lot of people talk. The point of philosophy is not to talk or to demonstrate how you can argument or how you can argue, or how clever you are, all right? It's not that. It's for you to actually act, all right? And he's saying that you should be living according to your standards, right? That what you're doing shouldn't be out of harmony with your words. What you're saying is what you should be doing. And that your inner life should be of one hue, meaning one shade, one thing. It's not out of harmony with all your activities. Like the way that you talk and what you feel and what you think, it should be showing itself in your life, right? And internally, you should be believing these things, right? He's saying that this is the highest duty, the highest proof of wisdom. That deed and word should be in accord. So you should do what you say, okay? Don't just say a thing, but do the thing. You should be equal to yourself in all conditions, always the same. You should be unchanging. You should be steady, right? Not going here and there. But if you truly have wisdom, and here's why, because wisdom is based on principles, and principles don't change. And so if you truly have wisdom, if you truly understand principles, then you're not going to change. But you reply, who can maintain this standard? Very few, to be sure, but there are some. It is indeed a hard undertaking. And I do not say that the philosopher can always keep the same pace, but he can always travel the same path. So it is hard, okay? And he's saying that, look, I don't expect you to be perfect, and I know that you can't be perfect, but you might not be able to stay the same pace, but you can always still be on this path, right? Don't be venturing into all these different paths. Observe yourself, then, and see whether your dress and your house are inconsistent, whether you treat yourself lavishly and your family meanly, whether you eat frugal dinners and yet build luxurious houses. You should lay hold once for all upon a single norm to live by, and should regulate your whole life according to this norm. Some men restrict themselves at home, but strut with swelling port before the public. Such discourse is a fault, and it indicates a wavering mind which cannot yet keep its balance. So he's saying, look, evaluate yourself. Like, what are you doing? Are you treating other people poorly, but then yourself well? Are you eating meager food, but then you live in this lavish house, right? What's in contradiction? What things are you doing that are in contradiction, right? And bring them into conformity so that it is the same. right? You shouldn't have one thing that you're saying and one thing that you're doing. You shouldn't be living a life in such a way that's not consistent. It doesn't make sense. Like in public, are you going to be, be drinking alcohol and being crazy, but then you're being this stoic saint in your private life? That doesn't make any sense. In verse 4, he says, "And what can I tell you further? Whence arise this unsteadiness and disagreement of action and purpose? It is because no man resolves upon what he wishes, and even if he has done so, he does not persist in it, but jumps the track. Not only does he change, but he returns and slips back to the conduct which he has abandoned and abjured." So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, here's the reason for this. Let me tell you what's going on, okay? It's because of this, all right? It's because no man can really just completely do this. It's really hard to do, all right? It's because you think a thing in your head, you want to do a thing, but you don't do the thing. In fact, you do the opposite, okay? And even when you do it, right, you don't persist in it. You jump track, all right? You change. You keep on slipping back to the thing that you said you weren't going to do again, all right? That's what's going on, so you got to stop doing that. In verse 5, he says, "Therefore, to admit the ancient definitions of wisdom and to include the whole manner of human life, I can be satisfied with the following. What is wisdom? Always desiring the same things and always refusing the same things. You may be excused from adding a little proviso that what you wish should be right, since no man can always be satisfied with the same thing unless it is right." So he's saying, okay, here's the hallmark. Here is what wisdom is. It is basically this. You want the same things and you refuse the same things. You have principles that you're living by. That's what he's saying here. Okay. And yeah, you can add a little proviso. Okay. There could be a little bit of variety in this. But he says this, look, you can't be satisfied with the same thing unless it's right. So if you're seeking all this variety, the problem is because you're not seeking the right thing. In verse 6, he says, "For this reason, men do not know what they wish except at the actual moment of wishing. No man ever decided once and for all to desire or to refuse. Judgment varies from day to day and changes to the opposite, making many a man pass his life in a kind of game. Press on, therefore, as you have begun. Perhaps you will be led to perfection or to a point which you alone understand is short of perfection." So he's saying, look, here's the thing, all right? You don't even know what you want, all right? You don't decide it up front. Instead, your judgment varies from day to day, and it changes to the opposite. Okay, so your life becomes this stupid kind of game, all right? So instead, keep on pushing in this direction, and maybe you'll be led to perfection, or at least you'll understand how far short of it you're falling. So what is the solution to this, right? What is he saying here? He's saying make your judgment, make your calls ahead of time. Live by principles. Have rules for yourself, for your life, how you're going to live, what your actions are. What do you actually want? What do you actually not want? Decide those things up front, not in the moment. Living it in the moment is a formula for disaster. "But what, you say, will become of my crowded household without a household income? If you stop supporting that crowd, it will support itself. Or perhaps you will learn by the bounty of poverty what you cannot learn by your own bounty. Poverty will keep for you your true and tried friends. You will be rid of men who are not seeking you for yourself, but for something which you have. Is it not true, however, that you should love poverty, if only for this single reason, that it will show you those by whom you are loved? Oh, when will that time come when no one shall tell lies to compliment you?" Okay, so he's saying this. So what happens if you do this? Okay, what's going to happen to your household income, right? If you don't just cater to what people want, all right? That's what he's saying here. Well, if you stop supporting that crowd, they'll deal with it. They'll support themselves, and so maybe what will happen is that you will become more poor, okay? And maybe through that poverty, right, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn who your actual friends are. You won't have all these people that are hanging around that are hanging around because of what you can give them, and then maybe some time will come when no one's going to lie to you to compliment you. How good would that be? That's pretty good. That might be worth the price of poverty, honestly, if that's what it takes to get there. In verse 8, he says, accordingly, let your thoughts, your efforts, your desires help to make you content with your own self and with the goods that spring from yourself, and commit all your other prayers to God's keeping. What happiness could come closer home to you? Bring yourself down to humble conditions from which you cannot be ejected. And in order that you may do so with greater alacrity, the contribution contained in this letter shall refer to that subject. I shall bestow it upon you forthwith. Okay, so what he's saying here is this. He's saying, look, here's the thing. All right? Let your thoughts, your efforts, your desires help to make you content with your own self and the goods that spring from yourself. So be happy with what you have and the things that come from you, not the things that come from the outside. Okay? Make that all of your effort. All right? If you do that, then commit all the other prayers that God's keeping. God can deal with whatever else happens. Okay? But make that your source. And then what's going to happen? You're going to be more happy, right? If you bring yourself down to humble conditions, okay, so that you can't be ejected. So if you're not depending on all of these external things, if you're not depending on all these luxuries in life, so then what's going to happen is that you won't have to worry about losing them, okay? So now he's going to give us the contribution in this letter, his quote. He says in verse 9, although you may look askance, Epicurus will once again be glad to settle my indebtedness. Believe me, your words will be more imposing if you sleep on a cot and wear rags. For in that case, you will not be merely saying them, you will be demonstrating their truth. So that's the quote, all right? I, at any rate, listen in a different spirit to the utterances of our friend Demetrius. After I have seen him reclining without even a cloak to cover him, and more than this, without rugs to lie upon. He is not only a teacher of the truth, but a witness to the truth. So the whole point of this quote and what he's saying here is like, look, you're going to be a lot more effective. People are going to believe you more. You're going to come across as being a lot more authentic if you're actually living the truth, right? So if you're saying that poverty is a good thing, if you're saying to not have these desires that are going to bring you down in life, then all you have to do is actually do the thing. And he's saying that, Epicurus was saying this, but Demetrius, he didn't even have any clothes or any rugs to lie on. He was just showing the full truth. All right. Not that you have to be naked, but get what he's saying here, right? Your actions speak louder than your words, right? You demonstrate what you're saying. You can preach all that you want. You can say all these things, but if you're not doing them, no one's going to believe you. In verse 10, he says, may not a man, however, despise wealth when it lies in his very pocket? Of course. He also is great-souled who sees riches heaped up round him, and after wandering long and deeply because they have come into his possession, smiles and hears rather than feels that they are his. It means much not to be spoiled by intimacy with riches, and he is truly great who is poor amid riches. Okay, so this one is a little complicated, but let's break it down. Okay, he says, may not a man, however, despise wealth when it lies in his very pocket. So what if you got money? Then what do you do? Of course, okay. He's also great-souled who sees riches heaped up round him, okay, and after wondering long and deeply, because they have come to his possession, smiles, okay, and hears rather than feels they're his. So he doesn't think that they're his. If you get a lot of money, if you get a lot of things, and you don't think that they're yours, you just have them, okay, then you're going to be in a much better position. You're not holding on to these things, okay. It means much not to be spoiled by intimacy with riches. Okay. So if you can be poor among the riches, if you can have all these things and then say, I don't need these things, there you go. That is where we want to be, right? We want to be a person who doesn't need all these things. You can have them, but you don't need them. In verse 11, he says, yes, but I do not know, you say, how the man you speak of will endure poverty if he falls into it suddenly. Nor do I, Epicurus, know whether the poor man you speak of will despise riches should he suddenly fall into them. Accordingly, in the case of both, it is the mind that must be appraised, and we must investigate whether your man is pleased with his poverty and whether my man is displeased with his riches. Otherwise, the cotbed and the rags are slight proof of his good intentions. It has not been made clear that the person concerned endures these trials not from necessity but from preference. So he's saying, look, you can't know whether a poor man, if he would get a bunch of riches, if he would still have that humble spirit, and or now would he? Is it just that he doesn't have the riches? Is that why he is acting this way? Right? Is the guy on a cot because he just can't get money, and so so his words seem more authentic? Or what about the other way? What if you have a guy that's rich? Would you know? I mean, how do you know how he would handle poverty? Sure, he might be living like he's in poverty now, but what if he was really in poverty? Right? It's a good question. All right, and he's saying that, look, you can't know. You can't know. It has to be the man himself. It must be the mind that must be appraised, right? You can't look at someone's condition and know. You have to actually know deeper than that. So he's kind of disagreeing to us in a sense with Epicurus here. In verse 12, he says, "It is the mark, however, of a noble spirit not to precipitate oneself into such things on the ground that they are better, but to practice them on the grounds that they are thus easy to endure. And they are easy to endure, Lucilius, when, however, you come to them after long rehearsal. They are even pleasant, for they contain a sense of freedom from care. And without this, nothing is pleasant." So he's saying, okay, it's a mark of a noble spirit to not precipitate oneself into such things, okay, thinking that they're better. But you're going to do what I'm saying, knowing that it's easy to endure, and they are. It is, okay. When you come to, after you've practiced it, after long rehearsal, after you practice it, it actually even becomes pleasant. There's a freedom from care, okay. When you're living in poverty, right? When you're practicing this on purpose, which he talked about in some previous letters. Okay. And without this, nothing's pleasant. So if you have all this stress, if you're worried about all these things, then nothing in life is going to be pleasant. But when you actually free yourself to the point where you don't care, now everything becomes pleasant. He says in verse 13, "I hold it essential, therefore, to do as I have told you in a letter that great men have often done, to reserve a few days in which we may prepare ourselves for real poverty by means of fancied poverty. There is all the more reason for doing this, because we have been steeped in luxury and regard all duties as hard and onerous. Rather, let the soul be roused from its sleep and be prodded, and let it be reminded that nature has prescribed very little for us. No man is born rich. Every man, when he first sees light, is commanded to be content with milk and rags. Such is our beginning, and yet kingdoms are too small for us. Farewell." So what he's saying here is that, look, here's the thing. I've already told you, this is why you should practice poverty, right? You should actually practice it. Actually practice going without, so that you rehearse this, so that you know that when it actually happens, if it were to happen, you won't fear it. And if it never happens, great, but you won't fear it. So you won't live your life in fear, okay? And so let it happen. Like disturb, like be a little uncomfortable, okay? Just because you have to remember that you don't need much. Right? Every single man is born without riches. All right. He has to be content with milk and rags. Right. But at some point, even kingdoms become too small. Like that's not enough. We want more and more. And so it's good to practice going back to this. And that's kind of the whole point of this letter, is this idea that you should go back to poverty. Like you should go back to being content with little. Right. That's very important in Stoic philosophy. It's not just practicing what you preach, which is important, but actually realize the truth of this. You don't need much. And the more that you think that you need, the more miserable you're going to be. And there's no way around this, because it doesn't matter if you get more. The only solution to this is to want less. I'll see you tomorrow.